Hi, my name is VG, and welcome to Surviving Religious Narcissism. Today, I want to talk about the apparent predator problem in the contemporary Christian music industry. It seems to be quite prevalent, and I am making this video due to the mounting allegations against Christian rock star Michael Tait. However, the purpose of this video is not to go into any graphic details about the allegations that are piling up against him, but it's more so to talk about the industry itself, why it's producing predatory superstars, and who's benefiting from this. The Roy's report broke the story on Michael Tait that he had been spending years grooming, drugging, and essaying young male fans. After that, Michael Tait did issue a confession. It was like a confession slash apology slash statement of repentance. I was not very impressed by it. I'll go into the details of that in just a moment. But in that confession, he did say that the substance of the allegations against him were true. His confession came on June 10th, and about 3 days later, The Guardian published their piece based on their investigation. The Guardian had interviewed about 25 contemporary Christian music insiders, and the general consensus was that people knew about Michael Tait. There also have been more accusers since, and at the time of me recording this video, one of the accusers is female, all the rest are male. And one of the most disturbing parts of the story, not that any part isn't disturbing, but two of the alleged victims are minors. One would have been as young as 13 years old. Grammy-nominated Christian recording artist Corey Asbury said that everybody knew about Michael Tait. When he was asked if there were others like Tait in the contemporary Christian music industry, he replied, "So many." So what's going on with this industry? Why are they harboring and protecting their predators? It's not lost on me, and it's not lost on a lot of people, that if a Christian recording artist, say, was openly gay or professed progressive political views, the CCM industry ousts them. There's no space for them in that industry. However, the industry knew about Michael Tait. For years, even decades, people knew that Michael Tait was living a double life. It's been dubbed one of the worst kept secrets in Nashville. On a surface level, you can see how hypocritical it is, what a bizarre double standard has been set. But when we start to really look into the CCM industry and understand its role and relationship to Christian evangelicalism and Christian nationalism, it starts to make sense. It doesn't make it any better. It doesn't make it less disgusting. It's still just as deplorable, but it does add context. And that's really what I want to talk about in this video. The origins of the contemporary Christian music industry was the Jesus movement of the 60s and 70s. During that time period, a lot of young people were experiencing these mass conversions to Christianity. They were dubbed as the Jesus people or the Jesus freaks. The movement started in California and spread all over the country. It would be featured on the news. And this was the first time that contemporary music sounds were merged with Christian lyrics. The movement in time did die down, but there were other really important things that were going on during the 60s and 70s, and that will help give more context to what's going on with the contemporary Christian music industry today. For one, the evangelical movement had already spread. It started in the 30s in the United States, and during that time, most Christians saw evangelicalism as kind of a fringe extremist movement. I still say it's an extremist movement. It's no longer a fringe movement. And due to the efforts of evangelical leaders like Billy Graham, evangelicalism became popularized during the 50s. And the way that evangelicalism spread was through Christian media and the consumer markets. And that's why evangelicalism is a movement that does span across many Protestant denominations. Included in Christian media is radio, television, books, and in time contemporary Christian music along with other products. During the 60s and 70s, there was a huge cultural shift in the United States. Many people in the United States were demanding real, meaningful, progressive change. There was the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the anti-Vietnam War movement. During this time, evangelical leaders like Billy Graham, Dr. James Dobson, who is still really powerful in the Republican Party, Jerry Falwell, the founder of Liberty University, where Michael Tait did attend in the 80s, they were sure to work overtime to counter the progressive change that many Americans were demanding. Evangelical leaders said, "Not on our watch." Strategic alliances were formed between evangelical leaders and influential people in entertainment and conservative politics. One example is the alliance between Billy Graham and Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon, while campaigning, he and his campaign perfected what was called the Southern Strategy, which is a strategy to garner the support and votes of conservative Southern Christian voters, really playing up on their racism and fear of civil rights. During this time, since Nixon was never a religious man, Billy Graham would work with him and coach him, help him to use a language that appeals to Christian voters, and their approach was highly successful. In 1971, Jerry Falwell founded Liberty University. Liberty University is no stranger itself to its many, many SA scandals. Jerry Falwell, a Baptist evangelical pastor, taught Christians that signs of moral decay included welfare, divorce, abortion, homosexuality, and secular humanism. He opposed the Domestic Violence Prevention and Treatment Act because he said that it would eliminate physical punishment as a mode of child rearing and eliminate the husband as the head of the family. In 1967, when his state mandated the immediate desegregation of public schools, he responded by starting his own private Christian academy. In fact, it was the desegregation of public schools that created the demand for private Christian schools and spurred on the Christian homeschooling movement. In 1979, he did something that forever changed the landscape of American politics. He started a lobbying group called the Moral Majority. The Moral Majority is very much credited for helping Ronald Reagan win his 1980 presidential election. Jerry Falwell was instrumental in binding Christian voters to the Republican Party. Something else that took place during the 80s was that what was once the Jesus movement, or the Jesus music that came out of the Jesus movement, became the contemporary Christian music industry. It became a commercialized industry, and that to a billion-dollar industry. Not only that, but the messaging of the contemporary Christian music industry became increasingly political, aligning itself with evangelical politics and Christian nationalism. Now, evangelical politics and Christian nationalism are so deeply intimately related. Christian nationalists believe that the government should be run by Christians. They promote Christian values, or more so right-wing extremist Christian conservative values, with the intention of achieving dominance over the United States government and also United States American culture and social life. Men like Billy Graham, men like James Dobson, Jerry Falwell, all of these evangelical leaders, not only did they believe in a very staunch patriarchal hierarchy where the man was in charge, the women and children were submissive, but they also believed in a very staunch authoritarian model for government, and they were all Christian nationalists. In the 1980s, while Michael Tait was attending Liberty University, he became the mentee of none other than Jerry Falwell. In 1987, the Christian rap rock band DC Talk, which became wildly popular, was formed, and Michael Tait was one of 3 of its members. He used to refer to Jerry Falwell as his white daddy, and Jerry Falwell helped propel DC Talk into its fame and glory. Something to be noted about the contemporary Christian music industry was that it always aimed to mimic the sounds of secular music, popular secular music, but replacing the lyrics with things that were meant to be more godly. And it was very appealing to a lot of Christian parents because they didn't want their children, their youth, to listen to what they thought was godless, devil's music. So even though the contemporary Christian music industry positioned itself as a counterculture movement, offering youth more wholesome Christian lyrics than what was available in the secular market, their main target audience wasn't youth. It was their moms. It was middle-aged suburban moms who were Christian consumers of Christian products. They would even offer these reverse engineering charts to Christian moms where they would say, hey, if your kid loves Nirvana, Why don't you try this Christian band for them? They'll probably like the sound of whatever X, Y, and Z Christian band. For that reason, the contemporary Christian music industry had to grow increasingly conservative and Christian nationalist in its lyrics to appeal to its main consumer base. CC Talk would have all of these purity lyrics about not having sex until you're married, encouraging young people to sign like these chastity abstinence contracts, making promises to God that they would never have sex unless they were married. Yes, the hypocrisy here with Michael Tait is astounding. Yes, it is. But again, this was what was selling to Christian moms. DC Talk had a smash hit song in 1995 called Jesus Freak, and it was referring back to the Jesus Freak movement of the 60s and 70s. And the chorus of the lyric goes, and I'm going to read it. It says, "What will people think when they hear that I'm a Jesus freak? What will people do when they find out it's true? I don't really care if they label me a Jesus freak. There ain't no disguising the truth." So again, this song kind of really played into that Christian victim martyr complex that's very common here in the United States. I'm not saying that Christians aren't a religious minority group in other parts of the world. They certainly are not here in the United States, but it gave kids a feeling, or it was designed to give kids a feeling that they were these social outcasts, they were part of a counterculture movement, they were these social outcasts because, they loved Jesus. But really, what the band was doing, which was, in my opinion, really deceptive, coercive, it was bringing these kids back into conservative political viewpoints, Christian nationalism, evangelical politics. In 1999, there was a Christian artist who emerged and took the Christian industry by storm. Her name was Jennifer Knapp. She had her first hit album. Wow, it's so loud outside. In 1998, she had her hit album, Kansas. That was her debut album, and she got really popular. After a couple of years, she took a 7-year hiatus and came back as openly gay. She is still a Christian, and she is now an advocate for LGBTQ plus Christians. She did have to leave the contemporary Christian music industry because there was no longer any place for her. Now, as far as I know, there's been no history of Jennifer Knapp ever doing anything scandalous or harmful, but the industry no longer had a space for her. Now, there are other artists like Jennifer Knapp, quite a few actually, that had to leave the CCM industry because the CCM industry has shown such low tolerance for anyone that challenges or doesn't comply with the evangelical, Christian nationalist, staunch, patriarchal, authoritarian order. There was William Matthews, who in 2015 left the CCM industry. He was a very successful recording artist with Bethel Music, one of the biggest names in the CCM industry. He decided to walk away because of evangelical anti-immigrant rhetoric and opposition to the BLM movement. In order to stand up for racial justice and other important progressive causes that are important to him, William Matthews had to step away from the CCM industry. But in the meanwhile, Michael Tait had a lot of longevity in this industry. After 2000, he was mainly a solo recording artist, but then in 2009, he joined the legendary Christian rock band called Newsboys. Newsboys also had a lot of conservative, political, Christian nationalist lyrics in their music. They also, in 2011, covered a song called God's Not Dead. It became a huge hit and became really popular amongst conservative Christian evangelicals during the Obama administration. In 2016, Michael Tait openly endorsed fellow predator Donald Trump for president. At the time, this did surprise a lot of people, especially the Never Trump evangelicals and the Never Trump Christians. But if we look at what his success is really attributed to in the Christian music industry, it should come as no surprise at all. God's Not Dead went on to become the anthem of the MAGA movement. There was these cringe moments where he and other evangelical leaders would lay their hands on Donald Trump and pray over him, and it was just sick, and it was disgusting, and it was nothing more than political theater, because all of this has to do with power and capitalism. Then, in 2025, everything came crashing down. So why is it that this industry has no place for artists like Jennifer Knapp or William Matthews, who really, as far as I know, and I did do some research, there's no dirt or scandals associated with their names, but they were able to tolerate and even protect someone like Michael Tait to the point that he was doing what he was doing fairly openly. It was the worst kept secret, or one of the worst kept secrets in Nashville. People knew who he was and what he was about, and they turned a blind eye anyway. And the reason why is because someone who comes out as openly gay, someone who stands up against racial injustice, they challenge the underlying patriarchal and authoritarian systems and frameworks that the evangelical movement and Christian nationalism is completely dependent on. Someone like Michael Tait didn't exactly embody good Christian family values. However, he didn't challenge the capitalist system. Jennifer Knapp didn't necessarily understand her assignment in the CCM industry. William Matthews didn't necessarily understand his assignment in the CCM industry, but Michael Tait did. And that's why there was always a special place reserved for him in this corrupt industry. The harsh reality is that evangelicalism and Christian nationalism will never hold men like Michael Tait or Donald Trump accountable. The stark power imbalances created by the patriarchal and authoritarian frameworks these movements depend on have and will always be breeding grounds for abuse and exploitation. Holding offenders accountable stands to bring their movements and institutions crumbling down. So they tell Christians to forgive instead, lest God won't forgive them, in a weaponized form of false forgiveness which plays out more like aiding and abetting, thus centering the predators rather than their victims. This is why I don't believe that the contemporary Christian music industry can be redeemed. So let's take a look at what's so toxic and so typical of a predator in his confession and his whatever that was, a fake apology, repentance statement. I was trying to get it from Instagram and I accidentally hit like on it, and then I realized that, so I was like horrified and I unliked it, and I find that to be so upsetting because there's nothing about this I like. I think it's so disgusting, I think it's so predictable, and I think it's so dangerous. So I'll just start reading it. Recent reports of my reckless and destructive behavior, including drug and alcohol abuse and sexual activity, are sadly largely true. For some 2 decades, I used and abused cocaine, consumed far too much alcohol, and at times touched men in an unwanted, sensual way. I am ashamed of my life choices and actions and make no excuses for them. I will simply call it what God calls it. What does he say? I will simply call it what God calls it, sin. I don't blame anyone or anything but myself. While I might dispute certain details in the accusations against me, I do not dispute the substance of it. Now, this is just the first paragraph of his confession, and it is full of red flags. This is exactly the plan. This is exactly what predators in Christian circles do. And this is why they can do what they do with no shame, with no remorse. It's an open secret because all they really have to do to win back the Christian consumers, in many cases, I don't know if it's really working this time because there's a mixed response amongst evangelicals. There are those who are willing to forgive him and those who aren't. But all you really have to do after doing any horrible thing that you want is play pretend or repentance. So this is a formula. This is a formula, and this is a part of the reason why the contemporary Christian music industry can turn a blind eye to people like Tait, because there's always a formula on how to get past it and then rebrand yourself and start making music and start making money again. Here, he's saying he's confessing, but he's calling his violations of consent, in some cases allegedly even against minors, as sexual activity. I mean, this is a lie. And this is what happens in evangelical circles. There's this idea that a sin is a sin is a sin is a sin. No, a sin isn't a sin isn't a sin isn't a sin. There are things that we all do that we're not very proud of. We may yell at somebody in traffic because we're tired and hungry, and then we think, man, I shouldn't have acted that way. I'm so embarrassed of my behavior. That is an example of maybe human weakness, a mistake anyone could make. He also conflates these violations to his addiction issues. Now, I think that's so manipulative because a lot of us are very compassionate towards addiction issues because, again, we see this as a normal human mistake or a result of, the weaknesses that people may have. That is not the same thing and should never be conflated with, grooming, premeditating these horrific, heinous crimes against innocent people, people who looked up to him, people who trusted him as a Christian icon. No, these are not just sexual activities, and they're not the same thing as struggling with addictions. He also uses the word sensual. He says he touched men in an unwanted sensual way. I feel that that's also so manipulative. If you're making a confession, confess. Stop beating around the bush. Stop using language that's misleading and dishonest. And then he talks about sin. I hate that. This is the formula. This is the formula in evangelical circles. If you are a beloved evangelical leader or figure, you can literally do anything you want because these things don't get regarded as violations by or real violations of consent and heinous crimes by many Christians. They're seen as a manifestation of a sin nature. This is not an issue of a manifestation of a sin nature. This man is a serial, premeditated predator. And this, to me, is proof that he's already planning and premeditating his rebranding and his comeback to the Christian music industry once this whole story settles down a bit. Then he goes on to talk about why he left the Newsboys. It was to get help because he was not physically or spiritually healthy. He goes on to say, I'm ashamed to admit that for years I have lied and deceived my family, friends, fans, and even misled my bandmates about aspects of my life. I, for the most part, was living two distinctly different lives. Now, I don't know about you. I have a lot of trouble believing that his bandmates didn't know what was going on because apparently a lot of people in the industry knew what was going on. I'm not a psychic. I wasn't there. I don't know what his bandmates knew or didn't know, but I do have common sense, and to me this feels very unlikely. And there's more here. He keeps referring back to God and sin. It's more about him and his repentance story than the actual victims. That's another huge red flag. This is a very manipulative confession. At the end of this confession, he refers back to the Bible. He says he ends this with King David's prayer of repentance in Psalm 51. And he says that this has been his prayer this year. Have mercy upon me, O God, according to your loving kindness. Blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. For I acknowledge my transgressions, and my sin is always before me. Create in me a new heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. I personally don't believe that anyone should forgive Michael Tait for this insincere fake apology. If you're truly repentant, why do you have to be exposed first before confessing and repenting? And to me, this looks like a predator's formula. Hayley Williams of Paramore slammed the Christian music industry, the contemporary Christian music industry. There are other Christian music. And she said that she hopes the whole industry crumbles as a result. I would love to see this industry crumble. I think that would be great. But I'm not quite as optimistic. And part of the reason why is because even a lot of the Christians out there who are not willing to forgive this man are still trying to hold him accountable for the wrong thing. I do want to stress this again. This is not a manifestation of sin nature. The underlying issues here are political power and capitalism. This man keeps receiving forgiveness from Christian evangelicals for the same reason that Donald Trump has. Even though they do not embody the Christian godly values that they talk about or claim to, at the end of the day, they are meeting the political agendas of Christian evangelical conservatives and Christian nationalists. And that's what all of this is about. It's not about the devil tempting anybody. It's not about a person giving in to some inborn sin nature. This is about a predatory person who was placed in a framework that allowed him, enabled him, and protected him while he was doing horrible things because he was meeting and pushing along their political and capitalist agenda. My guess is that he will take a hiatus. He will do a performative repentance. People will rally around him as he pretends to care about all the people that he hurt and all the wrong that he did, while he really just makes the whole thing about himself and then rebrand himself and attempt to reemerge in the contemporary Christian music industry. I hope that that evangelical consumers will not be willing to take him back. I think that we have reached a point that we really just have to put our foot down as a society and say no more of this. So those are my thoughts. What do you guys think? Did you grow up listening to Christian music? Are you willing to forgive Michael Tait? Please comment below. And if you like this content, if you found it useful, please do like and subscribe. Thank you.